Right, hour two of the big radio show today, and we are about to chat with one of our favorite new guests, and that is Sarah Montalbano from the Alaska Policy Forum. We were thinking about calling it Montalbano Mondays, but maybe that would just be, I don't know, too much. I do love me some alliteration, though. You know it. You know I do. So we're going to dive into that today. We're going to be talking about school choice. So let's jump on over right now. She is awaiting us in the green room. Let's get started and say good morning, Sarah. How are you this morning?
Good morning. I'm doing well. How about you?
You know, it's Monday. I got nothing else to say. That's it. It's Monday. The weekend was way too short, and we're back to it. But the good news is we've got you here to help us digest and pontificate and decipher all the stuff that is coming across our desk related to education. Can I ask you a question before we get started? Because I just mentioned this again, this latest piece from the ADN talking about the legislators facing a historically problematic budget, yada, yada, yada. And then, of course, this comment down in the middle of the article where it says school districts strained by years of virtually flat funding. The Senate majority and the House minority have said increasing education funding would be a top priority this legislature. The virtually flat funding, as a researcher and somebody who deals primarily in statistics and facts, does stuff like that just drive you crazy?
Yeah, it's a little misrepresentation of the facts.
Disingenuous, right? I mean, it's not just
Yeah,
it's disingenuous.
yeah, I can definitely understand that. And all of these debates about school funding formulas nationally usually start with something to the effect that school funding's been flat since whatever year. And that seems to be the template that is
Right.
followed in other states too.
Yeah.
Um, so
Even though we talked about it last week, while the BSA has increased only 4% over the last 7 or 8 years, the overall school funding since is it 2008, 2006, whatever,
2002.
2002, 35% increase in
Mhm.
overall school spending.
Yeah.
That's not nothing. That's not
No.
nothing in 20 years. 35% increase in 20 years is not nothing, and it's not virtually flat.
Yeah,
But
and that's after adjusting for inflation. That is incorporating that figure too.
it's a real true number. Right,
Mhm.
exactly. All right. Well, I don't want to get bogged down in that because if you want to go whack and watch last Monday's show or listen to last Monday's podcast, Sarah drops the truth bomb on everybody over that. Some good stuff. Sarah, but this week I want to talk about school choice. This is one of my favorite topics. It's something I've been pushing for in the state for a long time. We homeschooled all five of our kids. All our kids are, well, the youngest one's 17, so the rest of them are all adults now. And we did pretty good. I mean, we know we didn't end up with any Nobel Prize winners coming out, but they are happy, adjusted. They can read, write, do arithmetic, and they can work in the world, which is, I think a positive in this case. But Alaska, where many people think of as being the homeschooling mecca or the great beacon on the hill, so to speak, for many of the school choice type people, turns out that although there are some bright spots, we ain't doing so hot. Why don't you break this down for us here, this new heritage report and a school choice. Oh, and tell us about your webinar before we get started, because there's a webinar on school choice. I want everybody to get involved there.
Absolutely. I'm very excited because today is the first day of National School Choice Week. I'm decked out in all my school choice stuff. And what we're doing today, we're releasing the final portion of the Heritage Education Freedom Report Card about education choice. And then tomorrow we're hosting a webinar with an expert from the Heritage Foundation, Jason Bedrick, who will be talking about school choice in rural areas with us, which is particularly applicable. So I'm really, really excited. We have some good programming. Watch our social media. Go register on our website. We've got a web post for the webinar. If you want to ask questions, there will be time at the end. So you'll get to actually talk to this expert. I'm very excited about it.
This should be some good stuff and good educational for people. Anybody who is interested in choice, now is the time to start looking into it. All right. Well, Sarah, let's break this down. This heritage report, this is the last leg of this, like a three-legged stool, right? We're talking about the educational report. This is the last component to drop. And this, in a lot of ways, I think is the most important because it gives people the opportunity that if they don't like what's going on, they can do their own thing. Maybe. Give me the rundown here.
Absolutely. We talked about spending, regulatory freedom, and transparency last week. This time, Alaska was 48th in education choice options. That's the lowest category, although spending comes pretty close. We're only ahead of North Dakota, Massachusetts, and Hawaii. And so Alaska does do really well with homeschooling options and things like that, but pretty much other private choice options, other education savings accounts. Alaska doesn't have those, so it was ranked poorly on that regard. And then the charter schooling laws and regulations aren't particularly friendly.
So, sorry, I pushed the wrong button. Too many buttons on my new thing here. I get confused sometimes. Well, let's talk about it. So first and foremost, our overall ranking, and then we're 45th overall, and then 48th in educational choice options. And this is the difference between the the report as a whole and then 48th in this third leg, right? That's
Yes.
in the lowest category. That's how it works.
Yep.
Okay. So still not doing great out of 51, all 50 states in the District of Columbia.
Mm-hmm.
Still not doing great at 48th. But we do have some bright spots. Let's see. I don't want to jump around here too much, but let's talk a little bit about what I like to call the silver lining of COVID.
Sure.
The silver lining of COVID was that many people discovered that it wasn't as hard to school your own children as everybody made it out to be. And I think a lot of the opponents of homeschooling or school choice were in part connected to the educational system itself. And so all you ever heard was, oh, you couldn't possibly do that. You could, you're not smart enough, or you don't think, or you don't have the education, you don't have the training that you need, yada, yada, yada. And some people were just thrown into the deep end of the pool. And the pandemic showed a lot of us that it's not that hard. It's not that hard out there, right? I mean, I'm a high school graduate, barely, and I was able to homeschool my kids, and with the help of my wife, and we did a pretty darn good job, I think. So, what do you think?
Yeah, I think the pandemic's been a really exciting time for parents. A lot of it because the public school system failed so miserably nationwide. For the first time, parents were looking over the shoulder at the Zoom classes, and some didn't like what they saw. Others saw that their children were being isolated from other kids. They weren't having the social interactions that they needed to. And so it really made clear the importance of being able to customize your education and tailor it to the needs of students and families. And so there were so many exciting, innovative options. I mean, micro schools and pandemic learning pods and all these different small group teaching groups that formed nationwide. And homeschooling in Alaska really exploded. That's one of the statistics I've got pulled up here. It was up 18 percentage points in Alaska as of October 2020, and it's dropped somewhat now. But a lot of the people that got a taste didn't want to go back to public schools.
Yeah, no, exactly. They were like, wait a second. This is actually easy. We had people in the chat room who came in and said in late 2020, after their kids had been homeschooled for a full semester, they were like, my kid is happier. They're working ahead. One of them was like, my child's going to graduate almost a year early, like 3/4 of a year early, because they love doing school. They get it all done, and then they can go out and do other things. And I mean, there was a lot of positives. Now, some people just don't have the temperament or whatever. And so they reverted back. Yeah, they reverted back. But the bottom line is that the opportunity was there. And that's one thing that I am happy that we scored high on the report, is for homeschooling and that opportunity, we scored really, really well.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, rating Alaska's homeschooling laws, they're extremely friendly to homeschools. You have 4 options that you can go through. All but one don't require a lot of the reporting and standardized testing and things like that. That are one of those good things that parents can actually customize their child's educations while those regulations are rather low. So I was very happy to see that.
Well, and one of the big things is that in Alaska, again, there is, there's the importance of that low regulation on how people teach their kids, right? Because there's some states where you just can't have a homeschooling. I mean, because everything is subject to governmental oversight. Everything is subject to the government telling you that you're not good enough to teach your own kids and do all these other kind of stuff. But in Alaska, that's one of the big things that we have going for us is that the regulation on that stuff is very, very low.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the only option for private homeschooling that requires the parent to notify the state, seek approval, engage in mandatory testing, filing forms, and having teacher qualifications, things like that. That's if you open as a religious private school. So you can teach more than one family, but you have those trade offs. Every other thing, you are able to do it without most of those activities, if any.
Right. One of the things that we scored poorly on, and I hadn't ever really considered until I read your synopsis and your analysis of this report, is the education spending accounts, the savings accounts, education savings account, ESAs, which apparently down in the States is a big deal for some places. We here, we don't explain this to us. How's it work and why, what's going on here that we don't have it, and how did it affect our scoring?
Sure. So the Heritage Foundation had one category, which was just the presence of education savings accounts. Alaska doesn't have any, so we obviously ranked poorly. Education savings accounts allow parents opting out of public district or charter schools to basically receive a deposit of public funds into a government authorized savings account. Those uses are restricted, but there are many ways to use it. And it really allows funding to follow the child rather than being dumped into the district or anything like that. So
Right.
Arizona is particularly successful. They just passed a universal ESA that's eligible for all students. But several other states have ESAs. And just, I think, 2 days ago, 3 days ago, something like that, the Utah House passed a bill that's going to the Senate to establish ESAs. I think Iowa is trying to expand theirs. So this is really gaining steam in the lower 48.
Right. And traction. And this is ESAs, or that's money that you save. Is it pre-tax? Is it like an HSA where it's pre-tax money going in there, being spent for education, or is it state funds? How does that work?
It's basically state funds where they get to deposit some portion of the per pupil spending that a district would otherwise be keeping or putting into an education, and you get to keep some portion of that. So it actually isn't coming out of the parents' wallets. It is coming from the state, which would have otherwise spent it in a public school.
I'm excited to learn more about this. Sarah Montalbano is our guest. We are up against the break, unfortunately, so we're going to take a quick one, and we're going to be back with more. The Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Don't forget to come check us out on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitch. Facebook.com/Michael Duke Show is the easiest place to go. We'll be back with more, and Sarah Montalbano right after this. Don't go anywhere.
If you missed the show, you can listen to it on your time with Dukes On Demand. Oh, and it's free. Like America used to be. Streaming live every weekday morning on Facebook Live and MichaelDukesShow.com.
Sarah Montalbano is our guest here on the program, and we are happy to have her in the middle here. Sorry, I've just laughed. Sarah, just for the trolls in the chat room, who want to say, who is this alleged? This is the same guy that was praising you last week as one of the best guests so far in a long time. But give us your background on why should we listen to Sarah Montalbano? What is your expertise and what are you doing here for the APF?
Yeah, I'm the education policy analyst at Alaska Policy Forum. I've been working somewhat part-time for the last 4 years through my college education. I graduated with a BS in computer science from Montana State University, so I'd like to think I have a head for numbers. And I was born and raised in Wasilla. I went through this public school system here in Alaska, and I really do care about it.
Well, and I think that shows up and is true. Is the policy forum? Are you guys working on a recommendation for this session with with this whole focus on increasing the BSA as the one thing. It's not going to be just the one thing, but in the beginning, it's just the one thing. If we could just get the BSA increased, then we could save everything. Are you guys working on a policy recommendation or a position on that right now? Is this something we should be looking forward to as the session progresses?
We currently don't have one. I would say, in general terms, though, any increases in spending should probably be tied to improvements in outcomes or in more school choice options. So that's what I could say. Go to alaskapolicyforum.org, subscribe. You'll be, alerted when we come out with new pieces.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's see. Yeah, Kevin McCabe in the chat room just said that the Utah House just passed an $8,000 ESA.
Huge.
Arizona has an ESA, and it's proving to be a real bonus when it comes to education performance metrics. I mean, is this the solution in your mind? Oh, I don't really want to cover this while we're off the air. I want to come back to this. Because I think that that's a good thing for. We keep talking about backpack funding. We're trying to figure out how do you make that work. Corey DeAngelis talks a lot about that, but what are the mechanics of it? Because, it's the difference between, for example, a voucher system. That's a whole different kind of scenario. And we've really had, because there has been some discussion about vouchers in the state before, but it's always faced a tremendous amount of opposition from the brick and mortar supporters, the school unions and the teachers and employees and things like that. So, they are fundamentally different, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. The vouchers, and this is under the heading of private school choice, and the proportion of students in the program ranked by heritage. Those are basically things like ESAs. There's also tax credit ESAs where you spend the money and then it's applied as a tax credit on your taxes. There's vouchers, tax credit scholarships, a similar idea, and then individual tax credits and deductions. So all of these creditable tax related things are one instrument of policy that the IRS can help implement. But it is ESAs are kind of the gold standard, that you have that money, you take it out of the account, and you don't have to wait until the next year to get your money back.
Right.
Things like that.
Right. And it gives you the choice and the opportunity to use it as you see fit within certain strictures. I'm sure that there are certain strictures. Do they allow it for religious schools and institutions as well, or is it?
I would have to look at the individual states. I think no, mostly because there's generally been some stigma with using public funds for private institutions. Alaska, one of the barriers to an ESA in Alaska is that we still have a Blaine Amendment, a portion in the state constitution that basically says that no money should be paid from public funds to the direct benefit of any religious or other private educational institution. That's one of the weird things about ours, is that we say or other private educational institution. So it applies to most of these private things too. So that is one barrier to ESAs that would have to change or be found unconstitutional in some way.
Sarah Montalbano is our guest. We're getting ready to jump back into it, Sarah, so hold the line here. We're going to be right back. The Michael Duke Show continues. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Here we go. Okay. Sarah Montalbano, our guest. We're continuing our discussions right now. I wanted to, let's just keep going down the list before I jump into this here, because I think the ESA is a huge, huge thing for us. And I think it might be the way where we can bring on the idea of kind of this backpack funding. But let's move on through the list here of things that were evaluated by the Heritage Foundation, including charter schools. Now, I think a lot of us, including myself, are not really familiar with the delineation between homeschools, private schools, charter schools, regular brick and mortar schools. So can you break it down for us and then tell us how we scored? Tell us how it went. But can you break down for us what exactly is a charter school, and what is the function of it in regards to all these other types of schooling? And then how did we do?
Sure. Charter schools are public schools first and foremost. That's a really important thing to remember. They're not like private schools that are getting their own funding. Public charter schools are funded publicly, but they tend to be exempt from some regulations in exchange for increased accountability. So charter schools usually have to undergo an authorization process in order to open. They are checked up on regularly. I don't know how often in the state of Alaska, but every few years they have to be reauthorized to continue operating. And one of the most important things about it is that if parents don't like the charter school, they stop enrolling and they move with their feet. So unsuccessful charter schools usually see drops in enrollment before they finally close.
Right. And overall, charter schools are run, like you said, mostly primarily by private organizations, but each of the school districts does seem to have one or two charter schools in the mix as well, right?
Yeah, they're public schools. So the way charter schools are authorized in Alaska is through the local school board. The local school board has to approve the opening of a charter school in order for it to open in their district.
Now, in Alaska, how did we fare in the analysis by heritage of the in charter schools as well?
Yeah, it was an interesting thing to read because Alaska has 31 charter schools and about 7,000 students enrolled out of 127,000 or so statewide enrollment as of 2022. That is really an interesting thing because the laws and the policy and regulatory environment in which charter schools operate can make a huge difference in their success. So Alaska was graded an F on an A to F scale, just letter grades, worst grade. Because of that one charter authorizer, a lot of other states have options for, universities or I'm blanking. There's some independent charter authorizing boards in some states as well. There's other education government entities,
Right.
nonprofits, other things can authorize charter schools. And what they actually found is that a different study, local school boards authorize fewer charter schools than other types of authorizers. So when you have that regulatory freedom, it makes it easier to open. And then you've got more options and avenues. If your local school board decides they don't like your charter school, you're not out of luck in order to get authorized.
Right, because in Alaska, the problem is there's only the one charter authorizer, which is the local school boards. And obviously, that might be threatening to the brick and mortar school structure for those school boards, so they are less likely to authorize it if that's the case.
Yeah, they're drawing from the same pool of students.
Yeah, exactly. It also says that low school autonomy, freedom to innovate, and teacher freedom are some of the reasons why we're getting that F in charter schools, because we don't have those things with our charters, right?
Yeah, that was part of the report that goes into the F. It wasn't super clear what these metrics were, so I would have to look and see exactly which laws it's referring to. But a lot of other states have more freedom to innovate and do more innovative curricular things than Alaska's charter schools do.
And surprisingly, charter schools aren't funded at the same level as regular schools.
Yes. Yeah. One of the real gold standard things for a charter school law is that it gives the exact same number of dollars for, it's a public school. It should be treated and funded like a public school. But a lot of charter school laws say, 80, 90% of that funding goes to the charter school. So Alaska is one of those states that does not fund it to the same level.
But even with all those problems, Alaska charter schools still had good value-added test scores. Tell us how we scored and what does that mean, the value-added test scores?
Yeah, Alaska's charter schools were first place in value-added test scores, and that basically means that the average test scores for a given grade and subject, you look at that change to from the prior grade, and that's a value-added test score. So charter schools added a lot of value for the students in those charter schools from one year to the next. So that was really exciting to see that these students are getting a lot out of charter schools.
Right. So Charlie goes to regular school in the 4th grade, but then he goes to a charter school in the 5th grade, and his scores leap up, and that is the
Absolutely.
value added component.
Yes.
Let's talk a little bit about the open enrollment laws in school districts and things like that. How did we come out on that?
It's interesting because I found a few conflicting sources, but the Heritage Foundation uses the Education Commission of the States, which says that Alaska doesn't specify policies for within district open enrollment, which means that parents should be able to send their child to any public school within their district. Doing some outside research for this, I found a Reason Foundation report, which I can find the link and give to you since you're so interested in Reason. They gave Alaska 0 in its 50 state open enrollment because it doesn't allow between district or within district open enrollment, and does not transparently report school capacity, the number of transfers, or why transfer applications were rejected. So that's some interesting stuff. Generally, I would say we are not very good for open enrollment. Not that it is particularly easy to do that when school districts are so large. And that was another metric Heritage looks at.
Right. Well, and that's actually our next component. Although I did have to laugh because the Reason article, the Reason report states Alaska's current policy permits school districts to charge tuition to the families of transfer students when the student's grade level is offered in their assigned district, and the assigned district does not accept the billing. Meaning, I was in District A and we wanted to transfer to District B, and they're like, "Well, we'll just charge you tuition because that grade level is already offered in your own district, and you can't really." I mean, it just seems counterintuitive. We should be able to, like you said, any school in the district should be available for those parents to make, if they're willing to bus, or if they're willing to transport them and do all that stuff, they should be able to go to those different classes.
Absolutely. It's ludicrous. And I need to find the law that says that because I read that and I was shocked.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about school district size. You and I talked about this a little bit last week, because this is really a huge deal. 127,000 students in the state of Alaska, roughly, and a big chunk of them are contained within like 5 school districts. 4 or 5 school districts has the lion's share of those numbers, and yet we have 53. So we have almost 48 or 49 other school districts that have just a handful of kids. How does the Heritage Foundation, do they even look at that? Do they miss the ball here? What do they talk about here?
Yeah, I would say Heritage misses the mark on this. They calculate a average students per land area. So that's not exactly reasonable. What we see in their numbers are an average school district size of about 11,000 square miles. And that's, that's divided by 54 districts. But when we're looking at the really close, geographically dense districts like Anchorage School District or Matsu Borough School District that have a large share of the students, that is not exactly an accurate figure. One of the cool things about Alaska is that the 10 largest districts in the United States are located here, and all of them are more than 20,000 square miles. The largest one is the North Slope Borough School District, and it covers 89,000 square miles. So that's one of the ways that Heritage didn't really capture the uniqueness of Alaska's education system. And I found it really cool to find that statistic.
Right. Well, cool, and still like, wait a second.
Concerning.
Top 10 school districts, the largest school districts in the state, but geographically, we're all in Alaska because Alaska is the largest. I mean, we're 1/3 of the continental United States.
Mm-hmm.
It makes sense that would happen. The question is it the most efficient? And that is, it's interesting. Let's talk about some of the improvements. Heritage made their own comments, and I'm sure you have some to add. The biggest thing, we were just talking about the ESAs, the education savings accounts, at the beginning of the thing. We got talking about it during the break. There is a problem here in the state of Alaska, and this is with what you call the Blaine Amendment concern. Explain to us again what exactly that means. Why do we struggle to get an ESA in the state? What's the holdup here?
Sure. ESAs education savings accounts aren't going to be feasible in Alaska until the Alaska Constitution says something different Blaine amendments were actually shot down in Espinoza v. Montana, which one of your commenters who's up on it noted in the chat. And that basically says that this isn't a reasonable thing. The no aid provision to a state program providing tuition assistance to families who send their children to private schools discriminated against religious schools and the families whose children attend or hope to attend them in violation of the federal Constitution's free exercise clause. So that's one thing that the Blaine amendments shouldn't be necessarily in. But Alaska says no money shall be paid from public funds for the direct benefit of any religious or other private educational institution. So Alaska's is a little stricter. There will have to be some law change before ESAs are really feasible. And that's one way Heritage also missed the mark on this report, is that that was their first recommendation, pass ESAs.
Yeah, except for you can't. That's the whole point.
Can't.
Now,
not right now.
Yeah, this moves on to my question about the whole idea of what's being called backpack funding. Because sure. I'm trying to figure, how do we make that work? This is Corey DeAngelis' kind of brainchild of make the funding move with the student, period. Wherever the student goes, that funding from the state follows the student. So what's the best way to implement that? Is it with an ESA like we're seeing in Utah now for $8,000 per student? Is it something like that? Or because, vouchers have got kind of the bad name and we've fought over that before in the state and it's failed. Or is there some other mechanism? Or what do you think is the best improvement that could come out of this?
Yeah, vouchers are one of the feasible ways right now. The other thing I would recommend for parents with school-age children looking to take advantage of Alaska's existing programs, the correspondence school program, it is a public charter school. You can enroll in that and you can create, a kind of customized education with a little bit of private school classes and public school classes and homeschool classes. And you can actually be reimbursed up to $4,500 for those educational expenses, depending on grade level and some other factors. So that's one thing I would encourage parents to check out right now if they want to customize their child's education, is the correspondence school allotment program.
Sarah Montalbano is our guest from the Alaska Policy Forum. I guess, Sarah, here, I got about a minute. Give me just final thoughts on this overall report and what we should take away from all this.
I think it's really important for us to look at the examples of other states and see the successes that they've had with school choice, because it's not always easy to be the first mover on these kind of things. But we have examples from ESAs, Arizona especially, but several other states do this. And then trying to look for innovative ways to deliver the education that kids really deserve.
Sarah Montalbano, our guest. We're up against the breaks, so we're going to continue here in just a moment. Don't go anywhere. The Michael Duke Show continues. One final segment with Sarah. We'll get some other thoughts on this, and then I think we're going to talk for just a minute about some of the COVID funding that we've talked about in the past and what has that done for school districts across the state. We're going to be back. Don't go anywhere. The Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio.
Our light, our guide, and our trusted friend. Michael Duke Show.
Okay, Sarah Montalbano is our guest. I saw April said something about massive amount of misconstrued information about charters, and I asked her what was wrong, and she says, first of all, charters are fully funded at a higher rate than a large public school. They pay a small administrative fee for administrating their HR in their district they operate it. Are they higher rate than a large public school, or is this? I mean, how does that work in your information, Sarah? What do you say on that?
I'm not familiar with what she's talking about. What I've found in this report is that it is not fully funded, and it might be that they're taking into account the administrative fee being subtracted from the total amount to say, well, it's not fully funded. But I would have to do more digging about that. Thank you, April.
Well, and again, I don't think she's saying. I don't know if April is taking this as some kind of attack on charter schools.
Sure.
Charter schools are a solution. I mean, that's part of your solution to how to fix this is more charter schools, right?
Yeah, that's part of it, is making that option more available to students and families that want it. One of the other interesting things I'm seeing in the comments here is that you it's improving schools all across the system, and I would agree with that public schools shouldn't be left out to dry. But one of the things that school choice really does when it is prolific is it spurs schools to improve
Sure.
that are traditional public schools. Like, they can't just sit on their hands and always have a flow of students.
Right.
They have to get better. They have to have better outcomes.
Yeah, competition breeds efficiency. Competition breeds
Absolutely.
success. I mean, that's what when schools are a monopoly and there are no other choices out there, they don't have to listen to you. They can give you the finger and say, we're doing fine. Don't worry about it. But when there
Yeah.
are other choices and parents would have the opportunity to pluck their children out of there and those schools would lose the funding, it spurs them to do the right thing. I mean, we have continually thrown ever expanding amounts of money at the public school system. And yet look at where we are. Somebody said earlier, we've fallen to number 3. We need to reclaim that number 1 position on school spending and the number 50 position at the school achievement level, kind of in a sarcastic way. But that's the bottom line. If we're spending more than almost anybody and are still in the bottom, something is fundamentally broken. And maybe it's the competition that's going to spur the fixes in those areas.
That's definitely part of it. And I would really encourage anyone interested in this to come to our webinar tomorrow, because we are talking about an example from Arizona, which obviously has this really prolific ESA program, and showing that the rural schools there were spurred to improve, their academic outcomes improved. And that's just one of those consequences of having more school choice. And then the only other thing I would say for that is that it really is important for the students and families who want to stay in public schools to have a good education there. So that's why Alaska Policy Forum has always championed these kind of early literacy programs and things like that will really improve education outcomes for the students still in public schools.
Right, exactly. I mean, yes, the problem is that if you do have more choice, then you may end up with some schools that end up closing or consolidating but overall the system is going to have to do better to compete in the market of ideas. That's what the whole point is. I mean, that's really the kind of idea of bringing the free market to the educational system, because otherwise, again, we've seen the damage that monopolies have both in the free market on business and in other things, but in education, I mean, when you have no other choice, you're stuck. It's either that or you pull your kids out and you figure something out on your own if your state allows it. Luckily ours does, but it's problematic to say the least.
Yeah, kids need help today and they can't wait for public schools to improve in 10 years. That's just how I think about it.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Let me go back through here and see what else some of the comments have out there. Yeah, I mean, improving all schools across the system, that's what we need to do. But I think choice is how you do that. I think that's it. And, we've talked about, I mean, last week we talked a little bit about the BSA and how a big portion of the BSA focuses strictly on the administrative overhead. It doesn't actually get down into the classroom level. The challenge here is getting the maximum amount of money into the classroom with the least amount of overhead. And it seems like we're doing exactly the opposite in the way that the formulas are built right now and the way that they're funding it right now. It's like we're prioritizing the administrative over the educational component of that.
Yeah, and we saw last week, we talked about it with the Reason Foundation spending report 2002 to 2020. Administrative spending rose.
And we accidentally lost Sarah there. So she's going to come back to us here, hopefully in a hot second, and we can get the information back on there. Look at that. There she is right there. I'm sorry. What was that? You dropped out. What was that?
I said, I got to talk to my ISP because this is ridiculous. 2 weeks in a row. We'll see if third week in a row.
See if we can get it. Hold the line on that thought though, because I do want to come back to that real quick and your comments on it, and then we'll talk about the COVID stuff. But we're about to jump back into it. The Michael Duke Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio. Like and share, like and follow. Here we go. Okay, one final segment here with Sarah Montalbano for the day, and we're ready to go. During the break, we were just talking about, funding and choice and how really it may be one of the only solutions. The other thing we talked about a little bit last week, and we'll kind of reopen that discussion quickly here, is the idea about the BSA. And of course, the big push is, well, we need to increase the BSA. Unfortunately, the BSA is heavily weighted towards the administrative side, filling out and supporting the administrative side without a lot of that money actually getting down into the classroom. Representative Sarah Vance was on the program here a couple of weeks ago, and she talked about the statistics of something like only 45% of the dollars are actually reaching the classroom at the K through 12 level. And I mean, that's part of the problem, right? We seem to be prioritizing the administrative overhead against the actual educational component in the classroom. That's been part of our problem, Sarah.
Absolutely. I was saying before my internet cut out that the Reason Foundation report I mentioned last week in regard to spending, total spending went up about 32% after adjusting for inflation from 2002 to 2020. Total support services, which includes administration and things like that, went up 50% per pupil. So that's one of the things, is that these extra dollars are largely going into administrative expenses. And when they do, they are going into benefits rather than salaries, is the two main points of that report.
Well, and as I said before, when the money's not reaching into and we've seen the two charts with enrollment going down and administrative overhead going up, as we continue to see that more and more, then more and more the money is going to get consumed by that, because the more employees you put on and the benefit increases and everything else, not real wage increases, but benefit increases, it still increases the cost, but you don't see the benefit today. You don't see it today. And then that affects things like teacher retention and other things. So, I mean, there's a lot of problems there. We got about 8 minutes here. And so I just want to cover this briefly. During COVID, of course, a lot of things happened. Like we said, school choice options kind of exploded. People made things up as they went along. They discovered it wasn't as hard as they thought it would be to school their own children in one form or another, whether it was pandemic pods or group learning or homeschooling or whatever. But the federal government came into the rescue as well with COVID monies. And yet we still see some school districts still have millions of dollars sitting in the account. They haven't used them, or they used them for inappropriately, like the ASD. They used them for a one-time payment on a long-term cost, which was the teacher salaries and things like that. Mm-hmm. So talk to me for just a minute here about COVID monies during the pandemic, and what the effect has been and where we go from here.
Absolutely. This is a big topic, and one that I can't cover adequately in 8 minutes. So I'm going to give the highlights. Alaska's public school districts were awarded $538 million total from there's 3 grants from the federal government. The CARES Act has been spent already. The coronavirus response and relief supplemental assistance bill, that needs to be spent by 2023, the end of 2023, September. And the American Rescue Plan goes out till the same date in 2024. So districts are sitting on a large pile of money. They have yet to spend about $295 million total, that across all districts.
Right. And some of that money has been spent and some of it hasn't. And yet we still hear, and I don't know exactly what the plan is, and I don't know all the details, but we still see a lot of these school districts, again, in the news and things like that, crying and complaining that they just don't have enough funds. We haven't taken care of it, yada, yada, yada. And in some cases, they have money in the bank waiting there to do something with, right?
Mm-hmm. This is particularly important for the Anchorage School District. I'm waiting to see what they do about this deficit. They were awarded $184 million from the 3 of these acts, about $4,200 per pupil. they've spent a large proportion of this on certificated salaries, which means, professionals with a certificate, teachers and the like, and about 20% for employee benefits and 11% for supplies and materials and stuff like that. They need to be careful about spending one-time federal funds on expenditures that are presumably long-term. I'm sure some of these teachers and salaries are temporary, but a lot of them were hired with the expectation that they will continue to be a part of the district and there's not going to be mass layoffs. So that's one of the things districts need to think carefully about, is what kind of expenses am I incurring that are long-term that I'm going to have real problems when the federal money runs out and they expire in 2024.
Right.
So that's one of the big things.
Well, and again, that was just the example of the Anchorage School District utilizing a big chunk of those funds, basically offsetting other costs by taking it and using it to pay teacher salaries for 1 year, salaries and benefits for 1 year. And then all of a sudden, we got a crisis. Now we're $60 million in the hole. Well, because you avoided that by using one-time funds in the short term to show that your deficit wasn't as bad, and now you're stuck back to it. It's ineptitude. It's mismanagement at that point of the monies. And I'm always reminded of the old saying, piss poor planning on your part does not constitute an emergency on my part, kind of thing. And
Right.
but that's what they're doing. And now they have the war drum to beat on, that they just don't have any money. But it's because the money that was given to them by both the state, the property taxpayers, and the federal government has not been spent wisely.
Yeah. I would agree with almost the whole of that. They've got 117 million remaining of their COVID federal funding award. There are obviously stipulations on that. Some of it needed to be used for COVID mitigation for the CARES Act and things like that. But I find it hard to believe that they really can't use some of this to work on the whole. And then it was just not a wise decision to spend all of this on recurring costs when this is a one-time federal award. I mean, that's just my position on it.
Yeah, no, and I think again, it's eating the seed corn from the whole planting and reaping thing. It's that, from that whole analogy, it's the eating of the seed corn. When you eat the seed corn, what are you going to do? You're not going to get it next year, and you use it anyway, and it's a very, very frustrating thing. Maybe we should have in a couple weeks or something. We should have a visit with you where we can take the whole segment or the whole hour and discuss the COVID monies, because I think that it is it's a big problem. All right, let's finish things up here in the last 3 minutes. Your final thoughts and recommendations, overall a recap of the report for the National School Choice Week, and what we can do to improve it, and then another final pitch for your webinar. Go.
Yeah, what's really important in Alaska, we have great homeschooling laws. We need to improve our charter school laws by allowing multiple authorizers. I think that's a solution that would be a good thing to make it easier to open. The school choice of various kinds should be improved and created in Alaska, because they will help rural school districts improve. They will help urban school districts improve. That competition's a good thing. As far as spending goes, our spending is so high and we're really not seeing good outcomes for it. So increases in spending ought to be tied to improvements in outcomes or more school choice options like that. And then, school districts are sitting on vast amounts of federal money that they can use to actually help mitigate the learning loss and the decline in student outcomes that we saw over the pandemic.
Sarah Montalbano from the Alaska Policy Forum has been our guest. Sarah, you guys are doing a big webinar. Tell us what it's about. Tell us what's covered and where we need to go to find it.
Yeah, we will be talking to Jason Bedrick of the Heritage Foundation tomorrow at noon Alaska time. We will be discussing how school choice can help rural school districts. And he's written a really excellent report, Rustic Renaissance, that discusses a lot of different points, but case studies on Arizona with their expansive ESA program, how the public schools were improved by increased use of school choice. You can find the registration link by going to alaskapolicyforum.org. It's one of our first posts on our banner. Just click that webinar. You'll be able to go to the Zoom registration link. And if you register, you'll be able to ask questions of Jason and I in the program.
Which I think that would be a huge benefit. No cost or anything, right? Just to show up and get the information.
Totally free.
And of course, Sarah, if you go to alaskapolicyforum.org, Sarah has got, if you click the education section, it's pretty much all Sarah. I mean, if everything you read in there is all Sarah all the time, she's got a lot of great information, some very eye-opening statistics. I mean, I read some of the stuff in there and I was shocked right down to my socks, and I've been following this for a long time. But again, some of the hard numbers and the statistics because the numbers are right there. And when you look at them, you look at the newspaper, then you look at the actual numbers, and you're like, something here is not adding up. So get yourself a dose of truth on that. That'll be an interesting. Sarah, do you have an email that people can reach at?
Yeah, if you have any comments or questions for me, sarah@alaskapolicyforum.org is where you can reach me. You're also welcome to go find me on Twitter, Sarah Montalbano, with a 0 for the O.
Okay. All right, Sarah Montalbano, thank you so much for coming on board. It was a pleasure to talk with you again. Love having you on. Folks, we're out of time for tomorrow. Weekly Top 3 coming up tomorrow with Brad Keithley. All right, Sarah, I'll give you the final bite. Why not? The final bite at the apple. I know you love that.
Thank you.
Anything else you want to say, or any comments you read in the chat room that you want to respond to, or anything else?
I'd love to. We've had a lively discussion in the chat here. I'm very interested to see what comes out of that now that they have my email address.
Yeah.
The only thing I would say in addition is that this education choice piece, please read the report. It'll be published shortly after the show. So you all got a sneak peek.
Yeah, I love it. I love getting the information a little early. And I really hope that we can have a fruitful discussion this year. I hope it's not just ramrodding the BSA increase through, which seems to be the track that we were on. Luckily, the House is the organization of the House is taking kind of a different turn. So maybe we'll be able to have some fruitful discussions on all of this stuff in total instead of just throwing money at it, right? Just throwing money at it has not worked.
Throwing money at it never works.
Yeah, and so we've got to have some other conversations. I hope somebody's willing to admit that what we have right now is fundamentally broken and we need to address it. So,
yeah, appreciate
Sarah, we'll check back in maybe a couple weeks or so. If there's something else, maybe you and I will talk off air just to kind of figure out what else. I would love to have this conversation. I mean, we need to have this conversation, I think, almost every week while the session is going on so that people can understand the actual statistics and the numbers and the discussions. And this will be good for you because it's going to force you to ask questions like you didn't know before on certain things. You're going to have to go do some more digging. So you're going to go back and say, I got more homework before I come back to the show next week. That's what we're here for. We're here to make it easy for you. All right, Sarah, thank you so much for coming on board. As always, it's great to talk with you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.